We know all the conspiracy theories that Rachel Maddow fed us. I remember watching that at the time and being like, how can anybody like buy any of this? This is wild stuff. And she just would keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper down that rabbit hole, which was entirely fictitious. And anybody with half a brain ought to have been able to look at some of those things, like the so-called dossier, which was written as though it were for the National Enquirer, and have concluded, as a journalist, logically, this was not a piece of intel. It was not written by anybody in the intelligence field. It was written as though it was opposition research. So that was Hillary's opposition research, which sent us down that whole thing. And yet, Hillary Clinton, 2 months before the election, less than that, this was in like late August of 2020. I couldn't believe my ears when I heard this one. She went on some podcast with her former PR person, and here was her advice. Listen to this. For Joe Biden going into the election. This is before a single ballot has been cast, everyone, right? The election didn't happen until November. This particular segment, this is what aired in August, and this is what Hillary Clinton had to say to Jennifer Palmieri. Listen.
Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances, because I think this is going to drag out, and eventually I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch.
Excuse me? You do believe he will eventually win if you don't give an inch? You see what they were plotting all along. So wait a second. Let me be very clear. If your side is winning, then it's okay. It's fine. You can ask all the questions you want. But if the other side is winning, then somehow they should go to jail. They should get a mugshot. They should get indicted multiple times, and they should get stuck in prison because they dared to question the election. I dared to retweet something that was questioning the election. I mean, they dared to meet with the Speaker of the House in Pennsylvania. I have a question here. Like, can we not, as individuals, ask questions? I mean, sometimes it's not so easy to get answers. And if something looks as though it was close, could you not, if you believed maybe that you were the rightful winner in Georgia or Pennsylvania, could you not actually ask those questions? And what about your legal advice, right? Because they went after all the lawyers there. Rudy Giuliani, Mark Meadows, who was actually chief of staff at the time, Janet Ellis. They went after all the lawyers. So does it mean that you can't actually consult your lawyers and get legal advice? And if they give you bad legal advice, are you now suddenly going to wind up in jail because you dared to contest this thing that was not allowed? It was too sacred to be contested. I remember Stacey Abrams. Anyone remember Ms. Stacey Abrams from Georgia, who refused to concede the election when she ran for governor there against Brian Kemp? I haven't forgotten that. Do you see what I'm showing you on the screen right now? A New York Times Magazine piece. This would be from April 28th, 2019, titled, "Why Stacey Abrams is Still Saying She Won." So I went back and I read the piece again, and it was nauseating, like just absolutely nauseating. This was one big giant glorification of Stacey Abrams, and the reporter's like, gosh, how important is it for you to be thought of in presidential terms? I mean, it was just gross. It was actually a conversation between this reporter and Stacey Abrams, and you could sort of see it on full display. So it was just like, oh my gosh. And of course, the headline, which actually is an interesting headline, they don't even get there. Like, the reporter is clearly terrified to ask Stacey Abrams about what the heck's going on in terms of her insisting, right, that she's winning the election, because, that doesn't exactly set what you might call a good precedent, shall we say. Well, this was all before 2020, of course. This was back in 18 and then into 2019. Well, Stacey Abrams finally, after the reporter asked her, I kid you not, about her dating life. I'm like, all right. Good thing I read this and not you, right? It was a lot to take. Anyway, after we get through the dating life and how hard it is to date when you're in politics, blah, 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 we finally get to this little section where the reporter ever so gingerly asks, oh, I saw that recently you said something like you'd won your election, but you just didn't get to have the job. Really? I mean, that's how you go in, right? And she says yes. And then the reporter says, quote, is there any fear on your part that using that kind of language fans the same flames that President Trump has fanned about delegitimizing our election? And she goes on to say, oh, no. Quote, I see those as very different. Trump is alleging voter fraud, which suggests that people were trying to vote more than once. Trump offers no empirical evidence to meet his claims. I make my claims based on empirical evidence, on a demonstrated pattern of behavior that began with the fact that the person I was dealing with, was running the election. If you look at my immediate reaction after the election, I refused to concede. Indeed, she refused to concede. So I'm sorry, she's able to get this empirical data, but Trump doesn't have any right to ask for the empirical data in Georgia. Like just doing so somehow violates a whole bunch of you-know-what. Anyway, there was a little footnote after, quote, I refuse to concede, a little teeny footnote. You see that on the screen? You see the teeny little 6 and the underlining of I refuse to concede? This is how the New York Times Magazine handles it. And if you click on that footnote, you see this little tiny line that says, after her attempts to force a runoff fell short, Abrams ended her campaign for governor with a speech in which she said, quote, so let's be clear, it's not a speech of concession because concession means to acknowledge an act is right, true, or proper. Democracy failed Georgians. So again, it's just fine for Stacey Abrams to say it. And it's absolutely fine for Hillary Clinton to insist they got to cling, they got to hold on for dear life. Just not okay if Donald Trump dares to do it. I'm going to repeat this little quote from Clinton.
You know, Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances because I think this is going to drag out, and eventually I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch.
Yeah. So that's where we are, America. How do you like that? You want to talk about a divided country. You want to talk about a banana republic. You want to talk about kangaroo courts. You want to talk about a system that is just stacked against one side and has been really from the beginning. Do not forget all this election, not legitimate president stuff, all that stuff started with the left. Remember Jimmy Carter when he said this?
There's no doubt that the Russians did interfere in the election, and I think the interference, although not yet quantified, if fully investigated, would show that Trump didn't actually win the election in 2016. He lost the election, and he was put into office because the Russians interfered on his behalf.
Oops, we got to play a little more of that because it gets even better, guys. It gets even better. I'm going to go back to it and see if I can manage this.
I think the interference, although not yet quantified.
Here we go. It gets even better. It gets better. Wait for it.
Russians interfere on his
John
behalf.
McCatchem says, wait, what?
So do you believe President Trump is an illegitimate president?
Based on what I just said, which I can't retract. I'll tell you.
And they all laugh. Ha ha ha. Isn't that funny? I mean, that's like a huge accusation. A former president of the United States then saying another president is not legitimate and using the reason that, that the Russians interfered in the election and they stole it for Trump. And the reason they wanted him was, because there was this dossier. The whole thing was fake. It was all made up by Hillary Clinton. I mean, this is like the little boy that cried wolf. I mean, they keep trying to get us to believe their side and they keep getting proven wrong. Hey everyone, Trish Regan here. If you enjoyed that clip, please do me the favor of subscribing to the channel. Just hit that little subscribe button right over there. Did I do that right? Not quite, but you know where it is. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so that you get the alerts, and I'll see you back on the show.